Let me tell you something that most political analysts are still sleeping on. The 2026 Senate map, the one Republicans thought they had locked up, is starting to develop some very serious cracks, and not in places they can afford to ignore. We're talking Texas, Alaska, Ohio, Nebraska. These aren't fringe battlegrounds. These are states that could completely flip the balance of power in Washington. And if you think this cycle is going to be a quiet, predictable defense year for the GOP, I'm here to tell you, you need to look a lot closer. Right now, the Republicans hold a 53 to 47 majority in the Senate. That's their cushion. That's their safety net. Democrats need a real string of wins, not just one, not just two, to claw that majority back. But here's what's changing. The list of genuinely competitive races keeps growing, and it keeps growing in exactly the states Republicans were counting on to stay quiet. So today, I'm going to walk you through this entire map, state by state, race by race. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why 2026 might be a lot more dangerous for the GOP than anyone in their war room wants to admit. Let's start with the ground that nobody's fighting over, the safe seats. Because before we get to the chaos, we need to know where the foundation holds. On the Democratic side, you've got Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Delaware. These states aren't going anywhere. Democrats have the infrastructure, the voter registration advantages, and the political bench to keep Republicans from even getting within striking distance. Unless the entire country collapses around these races simultaneously, they stay blue. Lock them in, move on. Republicans have their own version of that stability. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and South Carolina. These are the states where the GOP doesn't even need to show up and break a sweat. They could basically set an out-of-office reply and still win. Solid red, no debate, no drama. By the way, please leave your questions or comments in the comments section. I will answer each one individually as time permits. Also, I would be very happy if you liked the video and subscribe to my channel. Now let's continue. Now, here's where it gets a little more interesting. The likely column. On the Democratic side, Virginia stays likely blue. Mark Warner has built the kind of statewide credibility that just doesn't evaporate overnight, and Republicans haven't produced a challenger who seriously threatens that. New Hampshire also stays likely Democratic, even with Jeanne Shaheen stepping away. The state has a consistent Democratic baseline that gives their nominee a head start Republicans can't usually overcome. Minnesota is likely Democratic too, but there's a footnote. Tina Smith's retirement adds just enough uncertainty to keep Republicans from fully writing it off. It's still a Democratic lean, but it's not airtight. On the Republican side, Florida's special election stays likely red, and Iowa holds that same classification even after Joni Ernst's exit from the race. These aren't gimmies, they require real campaigns, but they're races where the GOP still holds the structural advantage going in. Now we're getting to the part of the map that actually decides who runs the Senate. The lean races. This is where everything gets real. Georgia. People keep asking whether Jon Ossoff can hold on, and the honest answer is yes, but not easily. He has genuine statewide name recognition. He's run and won before in one of the most scrutinized races in modern Senate history. And crucially, Governor Brian Kemp has decided to stay out of the race. That's a massive development. Kemp would have been the kind of opponent who could make Georgia feel truly dangerous for Democrats. Without him, Republicans are left without their strongest possible challenger. Georgia doesn't belong in the safe column for either side, but it leans Democratic right now, and that's where it sits in this projection. North Carolina is the race that changed the moment Roy Cooper decided to get in. If you're not familiar with Cooper, understand this. He served as governor of North Carolina for 2 terms in a state that has been a genuine purple battleground for years. He has the name recognition, the donor network, and the credibility that most Senate candidates spend their entire careers trying to build from scratch. Multiple national outlets have already flagged his entry as one of Democrats' clearest pickup opportunities anywhere on the map. Republicans can still win North Carolina. This isn't a giveaway. But with Cooper on the ballot, Democrats aren't just hoping for a lucky break. They actually have a candidate built to compete there. Lean Democratic. Ohio is the race I keep coming back to because it tells a story about where the Democratic Party actually stands with working class voters right now. Sherrod Brown winning the Democratic primary puts a candidate on the field who has a genuine track record of connecting with Ohioans who don't fit neatly into the modern Democratic coalition. He's not performing a political identity. He's built one over decades in that state. John Husted is a real opponent. Don't misread this as a walkover. But Brown gives Democrats something rare in Ohio, a candidate who actually makes the race competitive rather than one who just shows up and loses gracefully. The national mood matters here too. If Republican approval keeps softening, Ohio becomes a real problem for the GOP lean Democratic in this projection. Maine is the subtler story on this list, and that's precisely why it matters. Susan Collins has survived in Maine for years by carefully cultivating an image as something bigger than the party she belongs to. She votes independently enough, speaks independently enough, and campaigns independently enough that she usually manages to hold on to voters who would never back a standard issue Republican. But that brand has costs now. The closer she gets to Trump's party, the more that carefully built reputation gets eroded. With Janet Mills out of the race, the Democratic field reshuffled, and the question now becomes whether Democrats can recruit the right challenger to apply real pressure on Collins's record. This isn't a blowout race in either direction. It's a grinding, detail-oriented pressure campaign. And that's exactly the kind of race where an upset can sneak up on you. Lean Democratic. Now let's talk about the tilt races, and this is where the map gets genuinely bold. Texas. I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. The Republican primary runoff between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton is draining energy, money, and goodwill from the party at exactly the wrong time. This isn't a gentle disagreement. It's a bitter intra-party war that leaves whoever survives weakened going into a general election. Meanwhile, James Tallarico gives Democrats a candidate they haven't always had access to in Texas. Young, sharp, and capable of making the race feel like a legitimate organizing challenge rather than a ceremonial effort to lose respectably. Texas is still an uphill climb for Democrats. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But when your opponent is bleeding from internal wounds and you've got a candidate who can actually build a coalition, uphill starts looking a lot more manageable. Texas tilts Democratic in this projection. And yes, that's a bold call. Alaska might be the most fascinating wild card on the entire board. Dan Sullivan is the Republican incumbent, and Alaska is, by most conventional measures, a deep red state. But Mary Peltola changes the math in ways that don't fit into the normal partisan framework. She's already proven she can win Alaska-wide races by appealing to voters who routinely pull the lever for Republicans. She understands the state's unique political culture in a way that most national Democrats simply don't. Add in the economic frustration around cost of living, the backlash to federal trade policy, and the general anti-Washington mood building in rural communities, and you've got a legitimate opening. This isn't a safe pickup. This is a test of whether genuine local credibility can bend a deeply Republican state just enough to matter. In this projection, Alaska tilts Democratic. Michigan is the open seat race to watch. Gary Peters stepping aside doesn't just create a vacancy, it completely resets the competitive dynamic of the entire race. Open seat contests are more expensive, more unpredictable, and more susceptible to national wave energy than incumbent-held races. Democrats still have the structural advantages in Michigan. Strong urban and suburban turnout infrastructure, a solid labor base, and a state that has shown it can resist Republican waves even in difficult cycles. Republicans absolutely see an opportunity here, and they're right to. But Michigan is still a state where Democrats can grind out a win even when conditions aren't perfect. Expected to draw massive turnout on both sides, Michigan tilts Democratic. And then there's Nebraska, which doesn't quite fit anywhere on this map, and that's entirely the point. Dan Osborne is running again as an independent, and he's not just a protest candidate. He built a real, credible anti-establishment coalition the last time around, and he's proving that there's an audience in Nebraska that doesn't feel represented by either party's standard offering. This race doesn't belong in the Democratic column or the Republican column. It lives in its own lane. And if Osborne wins, he becomes his own wild card in determining how Senate power actually functions in Washington. Nebraska gets its own independent category in this projection because that's exactly what it is. So when you zoom out and look at the full picture, and when you put every solid state, every likely state, every lean race, and every tilt race together, here's what the map produces. Democrats finish with 52 seats, Republicans hold 47, and Dan Osborne takes Nebraska as an independent answering to nobody. That's enough for Democrats to reclaim the Senate majority, not by a landslide, not by a comfortable margin, but by exactly the kind of narrow, hard-fought state-by-state grind that this map demands. But here's what I actually want to know. You've seen the breakdown, you've heard the analysis. Now tell me what you think. Which party takes the Senate in 2026? And more importantly, which single race do you think ends up being the one that decides it all? Drop your prediction in the comments below, because I genuinely want to see what you're thinking. And if this kind of deep dive Senate analysis is what you want more of, subscribe and stay close, because as this map keeps evolving, this race is only going to get more complicated, more unpredictable, and a whole lot more interesting.